Hello and welcome to Shape the System, where we find and tell the stories that help people to rethink the way the world works. We interview people from all over the world who are helping to change our systems for the better. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures, who help ambitious founders and their teams scale up for success. More about KPMG High Growth Ventures after the interview. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Awesome. Always like starting the show with a laugh. That's always a good start. Welcome back to Shape the System. We're going to be talking about education today, specifically maths education. And even before I introduce our guest, I'm going to be saying maths, he's going to be saying math, and it's going to be a global phenomenon that we're going to be trying to bridge the divide. So you're going to hear both sides of that equation. But before we dive into it, Aditya, welcome to the show. Just give us a little bit of context, where you're at, where you're coming from, and then we'll dive straight in.
Yeah, sure. My name's Dr. Aditya Nagrath. I got a PhD in math and computer science from the University of Denver. And from there, I started a contract software engineering firm called Elephant Head Software, where we put out 35 different product lines, which ended up being 50 different applications to market. And we did that in 6 or 7 years with an engineering team of about 10 people, 30 people if you want to count QA. And after that, we started Elephant Learning.
Great. Well, we're going to be talking all about elephant learning and also, curiously, how the name came about. And I'm sure you've been asked that 100 times, but I want to talk about it anyway. But let's come back to that. We always start with the problem space. And so I want to understand what maths education looks like, what it looks like in the US today, what it looks like more globally, and also understand the importance of maths. And there's obviously a lot of rabbit holes we can go in. So let's start with the status quo of maths education in schools in the US today.
Okay. Well, so the real challenge is that the status quo is not well defined because in the United States, there are 50 different states. Each one of them will probably have different goals. Each one of them will have different either laws or policies or strategies or grant programs. Each of the states have maybe 150 to 200 different districts, which are then having 10 to 50 schools, depending on how large the district is. And so like the system that's being managed is not really a federal system. And so like affecting change in this kind of a system is also very challenging. And I think that like there are some places that are still teaching mathematics kind of the way maybe we were taught growing up, where it's more procedural, where it's more, here's how you do it. And there's a lot of stuff out there that is also kind of moving towards something that's more conceptual. And by conceptual, they're really speaking about the language of mathematics. So like the way I like to describe it is like the color red. You can't look up the color red in the dictionary. You have to experience the color red. And because of that, it's kind of conceptual. In this case, it's visual, but it's conceptual. And so like with mathematics, you're talking about the quantities, you're talking about the operations like addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and fractions, decimals, and percentages as well. So like all of these ideas kind of have to be experienced to be understood properly. And that's kind of what we focus on. We focus on that.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I want to come into the solution a bit later on, but I still want to make sure I understand. It sounds to me, and I'm going to play some of this back to you, 50 states in the US, and then you obviously multiply that globally. And education is probably one of the 3 or 4 that are typified as moving slowly, right? Highly regulated, quite decentralized. There's no central kind of authorities. Healthcare and banking, and I guess military would potentially be one other one. And so these industries, if you want to call them that they typically are known to move slowly, and as a result of the fact, typically that they're highly regulated, or there's a lot of entrenched behaviours and beliefs in them. And so the argument here is that is problematic when what you're trying to do is to do 2 things: A, teach people about the subject matter, but B, teach them in a way knowing everything we know about education now. Because I've listened and read to some of the things you've said elsewhere, where you talk about this idea that we've progressed our understanding of how to teach and how to learn so much more in other areas like language, and yet maths is still being taught in this kind of rote kind of approach. Is that kind of the nub of it here?
Well, so the thing that we're actually talking about, and like when you start treating mathematics as a language, is can you use what would be the vocabulary words to solve a problem? That's the demonstration of the understanding. So demonstration of understanding of multiplication is being able to go out into the world and see a problem and then identify that if I multiply these two numbers together or some combination of multiplication and addition, then I would kind of be able to answer a question, right? Like I'd be able to address a question. And in school, this exhibits as a word problem. And so like one of the challenges is that like sometimes in order to help the student start to put the ball in the hoop, so to speak, we might give the student a mnemonic to solve a word problem, thereby bypassing the exact thing that we would do to test, does the student understand this? So they may not have the understanding. They may just be applying the mnemonic. And so therefore, they're demonstrating understanding, at least to the capability of us testing without maybe asking deeper questions. And so like this demonstration of the understanding of the idea, in my opinion, is way more important, especially now that computing devices have proliferated our society. So whereas maybe 50 or 60 years ago, when we were trying to put a man on the moon here in America, all those calculations had to be conducted by human beings. Now we have computers to execute those calculations for us, which makes that demonstration of understanding that much more important, because really the value in the human knowledge is, can I instruct the computer to do it? Or can I get the calculator to do it? Or can I, right? Like, but I have to be able to identify this is the way to solve this particular question or this particular problem. And mathematics is the answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating sort of, perspective on this. I think if you think about, again, taking the language approach, the way we natively learn a language is to be immersed in the language and use it to construct sentences to produce an outcome. I want milk isn't someone memorizing the words, I want milk. It's, looking at the fridge and pointing at the thing and then getting the thing that they want out of it. And why would we take a different approach to learning mathematics and putting it in the construct? I've actually just been rereading Sapiens recently, and I'm up to the part where we're talking about language. And it was just interesting listening to, or reading about the way that the Sumerians started with language, was that they actually started by using language to solve mathematical and administrative functions rather than language of poetry and writing and expression. They said, there's these jobs we need to do, and we need language to be able to do that. And this obviously predates algebra. And it seems almost organic that we would want and need to solve things that we're challenges that we're trying to do using mathematical language. And we would do that by using them rather than rote learning of them. Totally fascinating. So there's another angle of this that I want to dive into as well, because you kind of touched on it with, putting a man on the moon and where we are today. The importance of mathematics is probably not only magnified, but changed. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
Go. Like, how has it changed? Yeah, so I didn't want to make it too specific a question.
Well, so like, I think in the age of AI, and especially with people like Elon Musk out there making these predictions on television, I think that the solution to the challenge is that more people are versed in that AI, which itself is a mathematical thing. And the mathematics required for this particular field tends to be quite advanced, because you have to be able to deal in these functions, these analysis type questions that, to be honest with you, I don't personally like getting involved with. I am more of an algebra type of guy, so I like to abstract and get out of that space. But like, that's what it is. And the training functions, the learning functions that you're developing tend to be highly specialized to the problem that you're solving. And being able to understand this is, I think, an undertaking. It's something that you have to sit down and think about. And I mean, I've tried, and I gave up because I have better things to do. Though at that time, the chips were not as fast as they are now. So now it might be more interesting. I mean, the problem was, like, if you can't get a result in a timely manner, then yeah, I don't know. I don't got patience for it.
Yeah, but even coming back before, there's obviously a small group of specialized people who are trying to work out how to build and construct these machines for the usage of the rest of us. But if you kind of even abstract one or two layers away from that, if the world that we're growing up with is more and more data driven and we're interacting more and more with data, whether directly or through large language models or all these type of interesting things, knowing how to construct things in a mathematical way is going to enable us to interact with these things better. And so the language of maths in argument is, some respects, the language of being able to interact with technology, because someone who just learns how to do a thing and doesn't understand conceptually what it is that they're asking to do is not going to be able to adapt to the 5 different ways that might come later. So people who are getting into STEM now and thinking about science or technology and trying to go into these fields, if they're not really competent at maths, they're going to battle to be useful and productive. Is that fair to say?
Well, I think that's fair to say. The reason why is because statistics is the basis of science. So when you talk about science specifically, most of the, outside of physics, right? So most of the observable sciences are, can I run an experiment and then does the statistic of the experiment that I designed provide a result that confirms or denies my hypothesis, right? And that's like, how do I design it, right? And then you got technology and engineering, which are also very highly mathematically driven. But it's more than that now. So like finance, for example, if you want to work on Wall Street, I mean, they're hiring the rocket scientists because they have that functional analysis. They're hiring the signal engineers. The signal engineers are the people doing the AI now. But more than that, I think that mathematics, it's got a philosophical root. And the thing about philosophy and mathematics and this branch of truth finding, science, if you will, right, is that like it's the identification of what could be true based on the definitions of words, right? So like as we get to more advanced topics in mathematics, like if you were looking at quantum computing, we look at these axioms, we look at these definitions, which model what the physics looks like. And then we determine, can we build these computing models on top of it? And what could they accomplish, and et cetera. And that's why theoretically we know that, yeah, we could communicate using these entangled particles, and we could potentially compute these problems like the traveling salesman problem in a timely manner and solve these problems using these machines. And they know that long before they're able to demonstrate it in the lab, because mathematically it's possible. So you're not going to invest in the engineering of spinning atoms unless you know the outcome's possible. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And like, it's to someone who's kind of, you would probably, and I hear this, like, as I work in software generally, and often will encounter people who say, oh, I'm not very good with software, I'm not very good with technology, and in a lot of respects hold themselves back. The parallels have got to be there in maths as well, where people go, oh, just maths isn't for me. And I kind of look at it and think innately, there is an opportunity to be very good at maths in the same way that you're very good at language. You might not think it that way, but you're incredibly adept at language. You know how to express yourself in a number of different ways through simply being a part of human society. What is it about the way that maths is taught or could be taught that gets more people to be far better at maths and even potentially more confident at maths as well?
Right. So I think that the main challenge that is affecting particularly this issue is that 4 out of 5 students are starting the kindergarten curriculum, at least in the United States, unprepared, meaning that they don't meet the basic prerequisites. And the prerequisite for kindergarten in the United States is counting to 10. And the real problem is that even I, before I started this project, thought counting to 10 is just saying the numbers 1, 2, 3 through 10. And what kindergarten means by counting to 10 is slide me over 10 things, and the student's able to do that and stop on 10. And that second thing is a lot more challenging than the first thing, because in the first case, you could just be saying the numbers aloud. In the second case, you have to really understand what 10 is, and you have to remember when you start counting that 10 is the number you wanted, because now you're sliding over things, you're distracted a little bit. So like there's some more mental gymnastics going on. And I think that after this, mathematics anxiety starts to develop, and it causes this ability to say, well, I'm just not a maths person, or maths is just not for me, or mathematics, right? And they have people around them who also are exhibiting mathematics anxiety that will support these belief systems. So I do have this book on treating mathematics anxiety that's
Really?
just come out. Yeah, it's just it's right here.
I love it.
And this is discussed in the book. And this AI thing that you were just discussing is also there. So like in here, I draw what an abstract AI system would look like, and this is it here. So, but like the thing is this model, this was built around what people knew in the 70s about the human brain. And this is extremely abstract because like what's happening here is you have inputs, you have outputs, you have a function, and then you have a training function which alters F. And what it does is it alters F so that the inputs match to the outputs that you handed it. And you're hoping that the continuity of F gives you similar outputs when given similar inputs. And so like the classic example would be like my iPhone. Can I point it at different objects and give it this? So like, and you can play with this, like Xcode. If you download Xcode, which you can download for free, maybe you just got to get a free developer account on your Mac, has like a create ML, which is where you make a directory of photos and you put the name of what the objects are. So you can put a whole bunch of birds or like canaries in one folder, and then robins in another folder, etc. And they'll be able to identify the bird from a random photo off the internet after some time. And for human beings, I asked myself, like, what would one of these systems be? And the initial system, it's not just me saying this, it's Landmark does this. And I think a lot of psychology is based on this as well. And so what it is the inputs would be your experiences, and the outputs would be the meaning that you assign to those experiences. Okay, so like in this system, and this would be the input system to the human, because this is before I react, but I react to the meaning. I respond to the meaning that I added. And this is well known, right? This is communication courses. This is leadership courses. Everyone's saying the same thing. So for mathematics, for basketball, for baseball, for whatever it is that the student's trying to do, it boils down to the belief system, the meaning of I can do this or I can't do this. And the way that we trend to is the way that we go with it. So if I start doing math and it looks like I can't do mathematics, and I start telling myself that I can't do mathematics, now I'm looking for in my experiences that I can't do mathematics, and I'm proving to myself that I can't do mathematics. But in reality, I'm creating that.
Right. You're feeding back into your own training loop. Yeah.
That's right. And so like the trick is then for the coaches, for the teachers, for the parents, whoever is there who's going to be on the student's side, is to tell them you can do mathematics, right? And so that's the real issue, is that when you have that reaffirmation, I'm just not a maths person. Well, guess what? Yeah, let's just go that direction. That's easier. I don't have to do anything.
Hey, but there's two things there that are interesting. One, you talked about the positive feedback loop that says you can do this is possible. But the other aspect of this, it must be about creating a learning approach that supports positive feedback loops that reinforce. So if we're comparing and contrasting what it might look like in the classroom that's still teaching from the 1950s versus how you approach this in elephant learning, help me understand those two.
Well, so we built the system with the fact that that might be what's happening in the classroom in mind. And so like what the next thing you want to do is you want to meet the student at their level of understanding with the language. So the example I like to use is this one, is that like one day my wife needed me to pass something on to my 4 or 5-year-old. I think he was out in the yard. And I don't know, he gave me some feedback. And I said, well, look, I'm just your mom's ambassador. And then I realized that like I used a word that he's never going to get. And I thought about like, what would I need to do to get him to understand this? And I ultimately came to the conclusion that like, if I don't understand, like if he doesn't understand what a nation or a government is, right, I really don't have any shot at this. But like this dependency happens in mathematics, and it's a lot clearer. It's you can't understand what multiplication is if you don't understand addition, because multiplication is repeated addition. And so, right, like if we can meet the student at their level of understanding and then reinforce that you can do this as they're putting the ball in the hoop and reminding them, showing them, And that's ultimately kind of what our system was designed to do. Then we can get them moving in the right direction. And if they have the language that we provide, then they have the essential topics so that you can walk into a classroom anywhere. This was the goal. You could walk into a classroom anywhere. And as long as your age within our system is higher than the age of the classroom, so like if you're walking into second grade and you're looking at third grade stuff in us, you might not have learned everything that there is to teach in second grade, but you'd be able to understand the teacher and pick it up fairly easily. And let me give you an example so that it becomes crystal clear. In first grade, they'll start teaching addition, and then they'll try to reinforce it by adding on a clock or adding with money. And the challenge here is that those two ideas are also very abstract topics. Time and currency is like, if I didn't understand what addition is, this looks impossible, right? But if I understand addition, then this is possible. And so we're giving you those essential topics. And that's, I think, the big difference between kind of what's happening with what we do and what's happening in the classroom. But what we were doing was intended to complement what's happening in the classroom.
Yeah, and I was interested about that because one of the stats that's on your site, which it makes me as a parent. I have a 5-year-old. We were literally, I'm pointing at a table behind me, which people won't get on the audio, but we were literally trying to work out the difference between $1 and 100 cents and how those things were this morning. That was exactly our task this morning. But he's going into a classroom. I dropped him off at 9 o'clock this morning, about an hour ago. But I look at a stat from your site that says, hey, we can teach them about 1.67 from memory years worth of school in about 13 weeks. And my first two questions is, where do I sign up? My second question, though, obviously is, why is he going to school? And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I'm sure there's a whole bunch of other benefits. But if this is such a better way to learn, but you say it's actually trying to complement what's going on in the classroom, help me understand that dynamic a bit better.
Yeah, sure. So if the challenge is that 4 out of 5 students enter kindergarten unprepared for the kindergarten curriculum, and what that boils down to is a language gap, well, then theoretically, if we were to fill that language gap with those essential topics, counting to 10 in this particular case, if we could just get every student to count to 10 entering into kindergarten, then every single student would understand the teacher in kindergarten. Where the data goes from here is basically if you start in kindergarten behind, you tend to stay behind. And all of the data is broken up by income. So it's only the top income earners whose children are entering prepared. After that, on average, they're behind. The low income neighborhoods are on average 3 years behind their funded peers, which means that, what we see from here is that there's no really good reason to hold children back in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, at least in the United States. And I hear it's changing elsewhere because theoretically speaking, the data shows that holding them back causes adverse effects. And yeah, I mean, it would, because all my friends moved on and I didn't, right?
Yeah.
But it causes this other challenge. And the challenge is that you could have a third grade teacher who's teaching multiplication with the student who's on average 3 years behind in the low income neighborhood. So their understanding of numbers rivals a kindergartner. So their understanding is working with numbers up to 20. And they're in a classroom trying to learn how to multiply. They don't know anything about addition, though they've seen it happening. And this is an impossible situation. This is an impossible situation for both the student and the teacher, right? And so then the idea is that if there was a way, right, that we could just get him or this person, he or she, the ideas, the essential topics to get them from where they are now, counting to 20, to multiplying. If we could do that, then this kid could potentially participate in the classroom, regardless of, did they learn how to add with money or on the clock or these other ancillary topics. They could participate today in the classroom because they could understand the teacher. This should bring test scores up. This should make children love mathematics more because they can understand what's happened. This should have more positive outcomes. And that's what we see. We don't see it necessarily firsthand because we're not getting test scores back all the time, but we are seeing it secondhand in that the parents of children who have gotten the results are coming back and saying, this was amazing for our children. It essentially fixes the problem.
Yeah. I mean, I find it fascinating. I think there's, even since Khan Academy almost 15 years ago, it's clear that there's different ways to accelerate education at an individual level. And I think the challenge with any classroom is at some point there is always going to be more children than there are teachers. And so the opportunity to personalise the plan for the individual child will always be limited, just by the straight maths. So there's no getting away from that being the case. And so what people need in any form of learning is, as you said, to be met where they are and to be able to work on the things that are interesting. So the kind of highly personalised thing that teaches conceptual knowledge that is the foundation for being able to then go and apply that in whatever context, in this case, the classroom, definitely one aspect of it. But elephant learning takes this in a different direction as well, that feels only relevant now that, these devices are everywhere. And to help me understand the practicality of how how a child's actually interacting with it. What is it that makes it interesting and exciting or fun that means that they're actually getting into it?
Sure. Well, so what we did was we took the most effective activities that early age education researchers, or education scientists, if you will, have found that were effective at teaching mathematics as a language, the conceptual math, and we combined that with adaptive algorithms. And the feel to the student is a puzzle game. So what we're doing is we're taking the natural problem-solving nature of mathematics, and we're kind of gamifying it, and then we're presenting it to the student as a puzzle. Think Angry Birds, but for mathematics.
Okay.
And that's what it is. We present you a puzzle, and if you get it right, you get a reward of some sort. If you get it wrong, the algorithm's gear. Either way, the algorithm's gear, but either up or down. The way we describe it is like a basketball hoop that goes up or down as the ball goes in, right? So we're trying to find where does the ball go in and then inch it up from there. And because of that, the end result is exactly kind of what I said, which is that the students end up finding mathematics fun, because now when you get to class, what the teacher is talking about is new and interesting ways to look at a problem that you're already familiar with. And so, this looks interesting. This looks engaging. Your natural curiosity starts to take over. And so, that's the magic trick. That's how it happens.
Yeah, I think as a, and I hate the phrase "as a parent," but I'm going to say it anyway. It's incredibly challenging to push back on the pressure of devices in a child's life, right? Mobile devices especially. And you're constantly thinking, well, if they're going to be on a device, at least, you're trying to change their relationship with the device. Like, just in my own personal experience, I have, a 5-year-old son, and I want his relationship to be with the devices. If I want information, I can go to the device if I want to learn something. And if I want to interact with the thing, play a game as an example, whether that game has a learning construct or otherwise, and move away from the device is a thing that I just use to consume, where there's no active learning or active interaction happening from it. And so the idea that there's starting to emerge tooling that is complementary to the learning that you want for your child, but also gives them some leeway to be active in the kind of devices that they see all their friends learning. It's threading the needle in a beautiful way. So how does this work now economically? Because you have a fairly, I would say, traditional SaaS type model. Someone wants it for their child, they pay a certain amount, they keep it. But you just touched on before that realistically the top 20% of children, 1 in 5 who are getting through are all from the higher economic kind of spectrum. So the other 4 out of 5 who are least able to afford it, how are you bridging that gap?
So what we did was we created a scholarship program. And the scholarship program tends to be geared on income, but there's other factors that are taken into account. And basically, look, we're just trying to make it affordable for everyone. So it's kind of like the shoes model. The problem is just that we found out if we give it away for free, then people don't tend to use it. And so then that's why we kind of switched to this model. And then if they go through this model and they get to the end of it and they get to the lowest price and they still can't afford it, there's another application they can go through that will get it to them for free. And so we're essentially running the model, but we're running it in a more effective manner because, again, we have to squeeze out usage. And it's that gym model, right? Where it's like, well, I'm investing the money into it. And so I'm going to try to get the money out of it. And it's the easiest gym you've ever been to because it's just 10 minutes a day, 3 days a week. So we only ask for 30 minutes per week. We guarantee your child will learn at least 1 year of mathematics, and that's it, right? Like if they use it for 3 months, 30 minutes per week, you're doing awesome. So yeah, that's what we're doing. That's how we're doing it.
And I've got a couple of following questions. I just want to make sure I didn't cut you off. So on this idea of this sort of scholarship type program, that was really interesting. This idea that there needs to be some investment and some commitment that's demonstrated for the program to have an impact, and that's typically coming, I guess, initially from the parents saying, "I really want this for my child. I just can't make the financials work. What do I need to do?" Okay, well, you do need to apply and go through some hoops, or you need to use it for 2 weeks, demonstrate that you're using it, and then we'll give it to you for ongoing. Is that kind of how that program works?
Well, so with the full scholarship, if you're getting it for free, we're probably going to check in with you once a month. But the real question is like, what is the financial commitment that you could make? And like what we're finding is that like, yeah, the way we've built it is working, meaning that like, fine, if you're in the lowest income tier and you're paying the lowest amount, the dollar amount is still meaningful enough for you that you're gonna try to get that investment in that 10 minutes 3 times a week. And so like that's preferred to me giving it to you for free and then finding a way for my people to touch you to make you use it, because I mean that costs more money, right? I'm not going to be able to do that in a sustainable manner.
Yeah, and arguably it's not going to work. I just think the reason why I'm kind of drilling into it a bit is I think so many of the example I give in Australia is there's a thing called the Fred Hollows Foundation, and the Fred Hollows Foundation fixes cataracts in third world, developing world where they can't afford to do that, and also the impact of having no or poor eyesight is huge in that environment, right? It really affects their ability to even live, let alone thrive. And they have a model where they're essentially able to make money at a very retail rate in a developed nation, such that they can offset and afford it into a third world or developing nation. And what's interesting about it, from my understanding, is that there is still cost on both sides, but they're essentially saying we can subsidize this one by having this one, but because there's value creation on both, they have to ascribe value. But too quickly, we moved to you kind of hinted at a Tom's model where it's like buy one, get one free. And what are the impacts of not having economics attached to it? And the reason why I think it's interesting is when we think a lot about kind of impact-led business models, we tend to jump straight to, if we just gave it to them for free, they would all use it and it would solve the problem and we'd all be, singing Kumbaya. And it's counterintuitive that actually attaching some kind of economic reality to both participants is actually going to yield better results, not just for how many people can use it, but the actual utility that you're aiming for in the first place.
I don't know if it's counterintuitive. It's just that the people who tend to be in philanthropic type roles look at things kind of maybe as it should be free or it should not exist, or I don't know, right? Like something like that. Like there's a false belief in there that's causing a contradiction. And the contradiction is this: the value in any human being's mind for anything is the dollar value ascribed that you paid for it. I keep thinking about like Arrested Development, and you remember that guy would walk around, he's like, the guy in the $2,000 suit. He thinks the suit is worth $2,000. He's saying it out loud. Right? But like, yeah, I mean, to another guy, that suit's not worth anything. So that's...
Yeah, I guess the part that I'm thinking about, that, and I'm trying to reconcile it while you're talking, is that there's the number of behavioral economic studies that says the difference between something that costs $1 and something that's free in terms of demand for it is huge. But we can separate the demand for it. I want it if it's free, of course. Why wouldn't I have it? From the actual utility that the thing might provide. Your likelihood of using it, or likelihood of using it to the extent that it'll have an impact.
Yeah, I think they changed that economic model because they found out that human beings don't always act in the way that's most economical, mathematically speaking. And I think the challenge is this, is that like, yeah, there's a lot of things out there that are free, but like we don't respect it. And that's what we were detecting in the customer communications at the time. Even when we priced it early on, we were going to price it at $10 per student. and we called it Math Games. And I think people would come to our site, and it still said, you're going to learn 1 year of math in 3 months, guaranteed. And they didn't have 10 seconds to wait for someone to come back and reply to them. They'd say, here's a question. Oh my God, I don't got time for this. I'm out of here. And it's like, wait, we just clicked the button. We just got here. And so there's a value mismatch. You can see it, you can taste it, you can smell it, right? It's palpable when you're communicating with the customer. It goes back to, even if I tell you that someone else is paying $50 and you're paying $10, that means something to you, right? And so that's the reality. I mean, philosophically speaking, we have no other way of measuring value besides dollar, right? If you try to go back to barter system, how many chairs is a cow worth? Right? It's
4.
It's very subjective all of a sudden. But once you start putting numbers to it, a cow is worth $2,000 a head, and this chair is $50, right?
Right.
And
so
now
40.
I can do the math myself if that's what I want, right? But then that's the nice thing about money in the first place, is that sure, I could sell the cow, I can get $2,000, and I don't have to spend it all on chairs.
Yeah. That is interesting. I mean, the irony that we're, making all those references and going into that wonderful rabbit hole, which is always my favorite at this part of the show, specifically in the context of talking about maths and maths learning, a conversation we literally couldn't have without a fundamental understanding of some maths is a wonderful kind of ironic loop. How are you seeing kind of the impact? You talked about, a year's worth of learning, or 1.67 years in 13 weeks. And you talked about some of these stories from either the parents or the teachers or even the children. Just give me some microcosm of some of the impact that you're seeing at an individual level.
Well, yeah. So I mean, there's just so many stories and there's so many students, and the thing that blows me away, the thing that I've kind of already talked about here, which is that the students come out loving mathematics, because that's the goal, right? I got a PhD in mathematics. The person who helped me build it, he had a PhD in mathematics, or professors of mathematics at some point. And so that was the mission. Can we empower children with mathematics? And the student that comes in and they're doing that is empowered with mathematics. But there's also, stories of, my friends, my family, my neighbors, where they've had students that are first, second grade, doing fractions, decimal percentages. So these are students that are never going to have math anxiety. I don't know if they had it prior to coming through our system, but at this point, they're not going to have it, because so long as you understand the teacher and it's fun, well, you're not anxious of it, right? So this impact, this thing is, I think, what makes me feel most satisfied.
Yeah. And kind of, right up front, you talked about starting a company called Elephant Head, I think you called it, which presumably was the foundation for then going into elephant learning. Firstly, help me understand the arc of getting from there, or even your PhD days, into elephant learning, and why all the elephants, if you can help me understand those.
Okay. This gets kind of random, but
great.
It's all right. So I was dating someone who was Russian, because I was dancing tango, and that was in graduate school. And after 2 years, I found out she was married, and my brain that was operating so poorly after that asked her, well, how'd you meet your husband? And she said, oh, well, these dating agencies, which basically kind of amounted to the 2010 version of Mail Order Bride. But it's not really that, right? Because you have to go over there and do stuff. So I went out to Ukraine originally on one of these trips because, again, my brain wasn't operating properly, and they had a trip. And someone in my office was like, yes, you should get out of town. You're not, you need a vacation. You need to go on this thing. This thing will work. So, so I went out there, and I was in Ukraine, and it was just a very interesting place. And I kind of thought, maybe what I'll do is I'll move out here. And, as a software developer at the time, I could work basically from anywhere. And I did. And at some point, this didn't work well for the people that I worked for. They just didn't like the idea And so they told one of their clients that I was unreliable because I was in Ukraine. That client was working directly with me, said to me, they said this. And I was like, oh, well, fine. He's like, I mean, there were some explicitives used at that point. And he said, well, I think that's what I want to hear. And I'll have a contract out for you. How much are they paying you? And I told him, he's like, well, I'll bump it up by $5 an hour. And so now I'm an independent contractor in Ukraine working for this guy and his company. And at some point, we found some developers out there. They didn't want a lot of money. It was like $3-4 an hour. So I was like, well, this is pretty good. And I said, you should let me bring them on and I'll guarantee their work. So I brought this kid on and he built the UI for the piece of software that we were doing. And he turned it in. I looked at it and there was like maybe 2 or 3 kind of rookie-ish mistakes that I fixed and told him about. I'm like, yeah, check this out. And like, you want to stop this thread because when you switch screens, you don't want this thing running because it's just using CPU cycles for no reason. And yeah, that was it. We delivered the project. So like this thing worked out. And the next thing I know is that I got like 50 people out in Ukraine. That was the largest we got. It was like 10 or 12 developers. It was like 30 QA people. And it was like, random staff to support that, managers, yeah. So, but like that was a very stressful company and lots of people means lots of problems. And if you've never been in management and you've never run a company before, you don't want to be running this company.
Or any company, probably. Like, it's tough work. I mean, not to say that you shouldn't, but totally get it. Okay, so this is still someone else's company. We haven't got to Elephant Head yet.
No, that was Elephant Head.
That became Elephant Head. Okay, great. So there was this software development company. But why did it start? Why was it called an elephant?
Well, so like all the companies that I had worked for that were contracting firms, it was like 3 or 4 syllables. And it was like animals or like, so one, like the company I was working for before Elephant Head was Cardinal Peak, right? It's like 3 syllables. And it's like, oh yeah, like, and it's this imagery of this peak, right? But like before that, it was like a magpie. And like, I was like elephant, right? But like, I really liked Yellow Duck. And when I told the guy, call it Yellow Duck. We call it Yellow Duck Laboratories, right? Because it was like, Yellow Duck's kind of silly, but labs, that's really serious, right? Like, so I'll juxtapose it like this. And he said, that's not going to work. I was like, well, how about Elephant Head? He's like, I like Elephant Head. I'm like, all right, let's do Elephant Head. And that's how we got our name. And I put software because like Elephant Head is kind of rough. I was like, so Elephant Head software, it's soft.
That's so good. And you got to went, all right, well, if we're going to have a learning company that's nothing to do with that, we're just going to keep the elephant theme going, which has, obviously you can retrofit a story of, well, elephants have great memories and you're going to learn a bunch and they're wise and, considered. So I'm sure all that got added in later, but realistically it was a random name inherited from another random decision.
Well, yeah, I mean, Elephant Head software made elephant learning. It totally makes sense.
Yeah. It's fascinating. Oh, wonderful. Look, the reason I'm curious about it, and I don't know how often you get to tell that story, but so many people try to get too prescriptive with this stuff. And I've always said that, if you're going to name something that has to be remembered, then there's only really 3 rules for the name. If you hear it, you have to know how to spell it. And if you see it written, you have to know how to say it, and it has to be easy to read. And if you meet those 3 rules, then people can talk about it. And everything else, ultimately, you'll grow into whatever name you have and whatever backstory got to you. So elephant learning fits the bill in a wonderful way. One last question before we head off. So much of what we spoke about today was US-centric, but realistically, this is mass. It applies cross borders. Are you we're focused on the US, but anyone who might want to utilize this technology can get access to it regardless of where you are in the world?
Well, so we focus on marketing the UK, Canada, Ireland, anywhere that's speaking English, really. During COVID, we turned on the entire world and we said, okay, fine, if you speak English. But yeah, I mean, we're doing it in English. We thought about doing it in different languages. We got really, really close. We got the product in Spanish, and then we started to move the games to Spanish. And then we realized we'd have to turn the marketing into Spanish. And we'd have to hire customer support in Spanish, and that's when we stopped. We say, yeah, this is there's all the lower hanging fruit. Let's go after that. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, like this is going to get too big too fast with humans, and so like let's rethink it. But yeah, so right now it's the essential topics in English, but this is the thing about mathematics is that philosophically speaking, these things are true for those ideas, and so like this is why, like for example, if you hear stories about ET, right, like they ended up using music, but originally Spielberg wanted to use math. It's just it doesn't work out so well on the screen per se, and this is kind of why like we're sending encoded messages into space. Because like, yeah, try to decode this. If you can decode it, then you're intelligent life, which basically means you know math. So that's that's sort of the whole thing here. It's like it's really hard to avoid it, especially since the measure for value in dollars is a mathematical construct.
Right.
So yeah, I can't remember what the question was. I just started talking, I guess.
It's totally fine. I was just curious if anyone who's outside of the US is going to be able to utilize it. As long as you can speak English and you're interested in maths, then you can totally do it, which is kind of a good way to round us out. I think, ultimately, whether people like it or not, English is becoming the universal language. And even if you don't speak English directly, you will be able to speak it indirectly. It's only a matter of time before those translations become so good. What'd be interesting is someone who does speak another language who says, well, I want my child to speak English and to learn maths. Well, you might as well get them a subscription anyway. They're going to learn both.
Yeah, we had some refugee students come in Oklahoma. It was a refugee after school program called Touch Tulsa. And that's what it looked like, was that like if you look at multiple students, they would test in at the 4 or 5 year old level, which doesn't make a ton of sense unless English wasn't their first language and maybe they didn't know these words. But they very quickly got to a 7-year-old level. And then from there, they gained traction and they moved on. So like, yeah, I think this English thing, it was more prominent maybe 2 decades ago, because in 2008, 2009, if you did a Google search on a Russian or Ukrainian version of Google, you wouldn't find the results. You'd have to force it. I want to use American Google, and then you'd find the result. That's for software development I'm speaking about, sorry. But yeah, for software development, right? And so like, if you wanted to program software 2 decades ago, you had to speak English. That's changing now. Now they, like the Russians and the Chinese are regearing it. They're doing it in their language, I think. But yeah, I mean, this is, at least the documentation is in their language or redone in their language. And I have seen it. And so like, that's a big shift. But yeah, I mean, the language of science is done in English. And I think it's mainly because of the result of World War II. But I think it's a good thing. I like English.
That's for everyone. I'm sure we can get there. All right, Aditya, that's awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today. We covered a lot of ground. We went down as many rabbit holes as I love to go down. I hope you enjoyed it as well. For people who are interested, who have children or have nephews or anyone who's at that age where maths is going to become so critical in what they do with their life next 5 or 10, 15, 20 years, definitely check out Elephant Learning. We'll have a link to it in the show notes as well. But thank you for being on the show and sharing everything with us today, and I hope it goes really well for you guys.
Awesome deal. Thank you for having me.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Shape the System. As usual, if you'd like to suggest a guest, someone that you know who's helped change a system for the better, please go to www.shapethesystem.org, click on the top right-hand corner, then click Suggest Guest. Make sure that you click subscribe so that you get the new episode. Shape the System is an independent podcast with support from KPMG High Growth Ventures. Connects founders to the services they need along their journey. Whether you are looking to refine your strategy, mature your finance function, prepare for a capital raise, expand abroad, or simply comply with regulatory requirements, they provide you with the support you need to drive your business forward.